Morning. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners to order for Tuesday, September 11th, 2018, and I'd like to start the meeting this morning with a moment of silence. If everyone would please be silent for a minute. Thank you, everyone. It was a momentous day 17 years ago when we lost over 3,000 U.S. citizens in the worst attack on the U.S. since Pearl Harbor. So,
and many non-U.S. citizens also,
yeah,
Mr. Sheriff.
That is true. And lost a lot of first responders and continue to lose them to the horrible disease from the dust of the Twin Towers. So moving on in our agenda, first item is adjustments to the agenda. Any adjustments to the agenda today? Seeing and hearing none, we will move on to public comment. And I have a couple people signed up for public comment this morning. And the first one is Joe Burney. If you'll state your name and where you're from for the record, I'll start your 3-minute timer after that.
My name is Joe Burney, and come January, I shall have the honor of representing Springfield's 2nd District on this board. September 11th, I watched those Twin Towers, as we all did. My oldest son then volunteered for the United States Army. He had 2 tours of duty, one in the Middle East and one in Korea, and our family has given their all as well. This is the first of several commissioner meetings that I'm going to be observing just to listen and learn. And I wanted to let you know why I'm here. That's all. I'm greatly looking forward to getting to know and work with each and every one of you, each and every one of the commissioners around the common interests of our citizens and residents who have previously given each of you and have now given me the democratic privilege of representing, working for, and working with our communities to improve the quality and well-being of as many local lives as possible. I want to publicly thank Steve Mokrahysky and your staff and county employees who are and have been helping me with the transition. They have been nothing but helpful, gracious, accommodating, and informative. I've been at work since the May election, reading, studying, meeting, and talking with those who supported my candidacy and those who did not. Through these meetings, we've all recognized that we have so much, much more in common than we do apart. They want me to succeed. They want you all individually to succeed. They want Lane County to succeed. So I want to publicly thank also all the business owners, private and public and community leaders and neighbors from every imaginable walk of life who have been helping me through the transition. They all have been nothing but gracious, helpful, accommodating, and informative. I believe my decades of experience in business, education, clean energy, workforce training, and economic development will hopefully add value to the deliberations and decisions of this board. So as I continue with this, I invite each of you who I have not yet met with, because I have with most of you, and invite all input from my Springfield neighbors and all county residents as I really sincerely attempt to bone up for the job that you're doing. You or anyone can just email me at joeberney2018@gmail.com, JoeBerney2018@gmail.com. And gentlemen, I thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
It's nice to see you, Commissioner Lee.
And next I have Chris Orzinger.
Well, good morning, Commissioners. It's great to be here on this day when you're going to be looking and hearing a report on and discussing the habitat management plan for Howard Buford Recreation Area. This beloved park is something that so many people care about because of the natural recreational opportunities it affords and the beautiful diversity of habitats, which are what we love about Mount Pisgah, the open savannas, the beauty of the conifer forest on the north slope, the opportunity to enjoy the rivers down along the Coast Fork. And I guess I just wanted to put it in some historic context that way back in 1994, when the HBR master plan was adopted, one of the goals was to accommodate increased use while protecting the sensitive natural resources. And isn't this the critical, difficult question that we are constantly asking our parks managers and our volunteers and agencies like Mount Pisgah Arboretum and the Friends to think through, how do we take care of this beautiful place so people can really enjoy it, yet we don't love it to death. So while that plan has identified a clear vision for enhancing the riparian areas and riparian floodplain forests and the upland habitats like the oak savannas that are really so important to so many species and pollinators that help with the farmlands in the area, we also integrated a conservation target of visitor experience, and in that way had a robust dialogue between how to balance the recreation and always trying to conserve the beauty of that place for people to enjoy. So I think the other thing I think is notable is that the kind of restoration work the plan calls for to take care of those savannas and prairies also will help reduce the fire hazards that we are increasingly experiencing in Western Oregon and is evident to all of us. So I think those are a couple of things that are worth keeping in mind. I want to take this moment just to appreciate Lane County staff and agency staff who participated in the development of the plan, from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, all these agencies who served on the Technical Advisory Group, and many of whom who sent letters of support for adopting that plan, were very critical to giving the broad perspective of all the competing complex issues for how to take care of that land for future generations. So thank you for your engagement in the issue, and look forward to a positive discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That's everyone I have signed up. Got one more. Brad Von Apple.
Hi, my name is Brad Van Apple. I know some of you. I'm the director of Mount Pisgah Arboretum, and I'm here along with Chris and the others to speak on behalf of the Habitat Management Plan for Hart Beaufort Recreation Area. I look forward to your discussion today and your serious consideration. The Arboretum has been part of the park since its founding in the 70s, and within our 209 acres, we've done a great deal of habitat restoration and management, and this is the largest piece of natural land in county ownership, I understand, and really a community treasure. It deserves to be well taken care of and preserved for the future, and I think this plan is well thought out. It's undergone a lot of public input, and it's something that we support at the Arboretum. Chris mentioned the visitor experience elements of the plan. That's very important to us. There's also educational elements to the plan to teach the public about the natural resources out there, and that's a role that the Arboretum plays a large part in. So we're looking forward to that, and I want to thank you for taking the time to consider this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is everyone I had signed up to speak this morning? Was there anyone else that wanted to address the board this morning? Seeing none, then we'll move on to Commissioner's response to public comments and/or other issues and remonstrance. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. I just want to thank first Mr. Bernie for coming today to start the transition process. I really appreciate your attention to this, and look forward to your service on the board in January. And as to the management plan on Howard Beaufort Recreation Area, I just want to thank everybody that that talked this morning, but also there's hundreds of other people, as was mentioned by Mr. Van Appel, that have been involved in this from different agencies, as well as Mr. Orsinger mentioning the different agencies that have been participating in this for such a long time. And I mentioned earlier before the meeting that not only the current member on the Parks Advisory Committee that I recommended, Kevin, but also his predecessor, Dr. Dunlap, they have both reviewed this and both gotten in touch with me. So I don't know if other commissioners have had contact with the citizens on the group, but I just want to assure anyone that this has gone through a pretty significant citizen involvement as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you guys for the work that you do. I have a personal connection with Mount Pisgah. Some of you know the story that that's my mother's home. That's where she grew up. She's now nearly 93 years old. She's not able to get out to see the wonderful work that you've done, but I know she would be pleased, without a doubt. So again, thank you so much for the work that you're doing out there and the shepherding that you're doing to guide that into the future for generations to come to enjoy Mount Pisgah and Buford Park. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. Mr. Burney, thank you for being here this morning, and thank you for your statement. You're boning up, getting ready to join us. Looking forward to helping in any way that I can. It was a pleasure meeting you on the housing tour about 4 weeks ago now. So, thank you. And Mr. Orsinger, I hope we don't love it to death also. And that's really that's the work that we're undergoing right now, is making sure that this natural, visitor experience is an extremely important element of the plan. Another quote that I wrote down, making certain that the visitor experience is a part of the plan and that it meshes nicely with the plan. I'm imagining taking my 2.5-year-old grandson there and just explaining, well, that's what an oak tree looks like when it's born. And because he collects acorns out at Kirk Pond. And I think back on my very first experience at Buford Park, back in 1976. I was a brand new second lieutenant in the Alpha Company, the 2nd and the 162, and we had a map reading course up there. And as the butt of everybody's joke, which second lieutenants are, I was the one who had to crawl through the brush to find the map reading points. Well, they hadn't told me really, and I didn't recognize the fact that the brush was populated or infested by a great deal of poison oak. And I remember that trip for about 4 weeks afterwards. It was, that was my first experience at Buford, but since then, many wonderful experiences. Thank you for your work on that. We'll talk more about that. And Mr. Chair, there's one other thing I'd like to point out, is that the board authorized my travel to Nashville for the Association of the NACO conference. I was invited to participate in a panel discussion. The discussion was Criminal Justice and Behavioral Health Part 3, Tracking Connections to Services and Outcomes for Individuals with the Highest Needs in the Justice System. And it was establishing effective connections to important services for justice-involved populations. I had a chance to sit on that panel with the moderator. It was Dr. Jenny Simpson from the Office of Innovation with SAMHSA. And Dr. Simpson was very interested in our FUSE program, asked lots of questions about it, and took away the PowerPoint presentation that I had made there. There were a lot of questions surrounding it. And as an aside, SAMHSA is a granting agency. It's the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. And they provide all kinds of innovative grants and direction for localities, and they're trying to push things down to the very local level. On Friday, we received word that we received a 5 times $400,000 grant from SAMHSA specifically for our FUSE program. It's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration hereby awards a grant in the amount of $397,199. So I exaggerated when I said 400,000. So now, the work that went into writing this grant was broad, and our staff, I don't really see Steve Manella's in England right now, but the staff that wrote this grant did a masterful job and made it so that when SAMHSA saw this, they couldn't say no. Our FUSE program has received a shot in the arm that's going to project it deep into the future in terms of how we are able to address specifically connections for important services for not just justice-involved populations, but people who potentially could be justice-involved populations, diverting them into housing, into our 1A on our strategic plan, housing. And it really, everything is coming together in that respect, Mr. Mokrahayski, and your staff deserves a great deal of credit for what is ultimately a $2 million grant to fortify our FUSE program, which has already demonstrated success with about $50,000 worth of spending. So thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for that indulgence.
Mr. Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know we're having an employee recognition coming up right after this, but this is perfect timing. So guess what, Becky? Here's the final report of the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force. And it's going to be actually presented to the legislature on Friday, the 14th. And with Becky coming up here with employee recognition, I just, first of all, I wanted to say thank you to you. And when David Reeser was here as well, before he left to the dark side of the university. Anyway, just kidding. I just want to say thank you very much. And anytime we received information, I would forward them on to Becky and David and say, would appreciate your comments so that we could take them back to the task force. And the vote was unanimous. So this was all groups, and trucking, environmental, unions, the counties, cities, all advocates. It was a unanimous vote to accept the task force. And I was real fortunate to be on the a subcommittee, which was the law enforcement and law enforcement subcommittee. And this was a subcommittee that actually talked about not only law enforcement, but crash reporting. And I took a lot of information that from our fatal crash investigative team and actually presented that, and it was adopted into the task force. So Lane County has got a lot of fingerprints all over this, and thank you to our staff, and in particular, Becky, thank you to you.
So I real quick want to say thanks to Joe for coming in and starting so early on getting to on board here at Lane County. I couldn't start till November because I was still in a competitive race right through November. And technically, you're not commissioner-elect till the November election certified. So one of the things I want to appreciate right now is Commissioner Lyken. It seems simple to me to have somebody that, won in the May primary, start getting information from the county and all that. In fact, I met with Joe within a couple weeks of the primary just to get to know him. And I contacted the folks at AOC recently to try and find out about making sure that various commissioners, designees, and folks that were running for commissioner that might become commissioners got information about the upcoming annual conference so they could hold the dates open. Because there's a new commissioner orientation that they offered, a lot of great information. And I found out that there is a huge reluctance to do that. That Commissioner Lyken's attitude to allowing a non-commissioner-elect to start working and working with staff and getting to know is not the norm. That across the state, quite often, there's a lot of hard feelings about all that, and they actually keep, until January comes and they're officially sworn in, a lot of commissioners are not onboarded and not allowed to start learning ahead of the curve. And it's just general policy for AOC not to be contacting those folks prior to the November election, which because throughout the state, that's not the norm. So I want to thank Commissioner Lyken for his courtesy and forward thinking and thinking about what's best for the citizens of Lane County and not being one of those commissioners that has that sort of hard feelings and personalizing the issue and allowing Joe to have the access he has and to, I know you've met and gotten a tour of the courthouse and you're starting to learn about the departments And I really appreciate that because I know how much it was like drinking out of a fire hose between, the first week of November and the first week of January for me, while I was still trying to work full-time and finish up, my career at eWeb. So I really appreciate you taking the time and look forward to working with you. And I want to thank Commissioner Lyken for his tolerance and forbearance in allowing that, because it's not the norm, believe it or not. So any other remonstrance from commissioners? If not, then we'll move on, because we do have a full agenda today. And we'll move on to employee recognition. Mr. Mokahysky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll invite Becky Taylor and Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley, our Public Works Director, and Becky Taylor is our Senior Transportation Planner in Public Works, Engineering, and Construction Services. Commissioners, you all know Becky as, come on up here, Becky. You don't get to sit in the audience for this one. You have to sit up at the table. It's just a pleasure. Of course, we always love recognizing our outstanding employees for their incredible work, and you all know Becky, so I probably don't need to say anything, but I'm going to, for why we're recognizing her today. But of course, you know that Becky has been a tireless advocate to improve the safety on Lane County roads. She's been instrumental in creating the Transportation Safety Action Plan, or TSAP. She's worked closely with partners across the state to enhance our education efforts and strengthen communication and partnership with our rural communities in particular, where we have a significant traffic safety and fatality issue. And she's been critical in the formation and development of our fatal crash investigation team. We recently had a presentation with County Council on that. So we're recognizing Becky today for her work around driver education. Becky coordinated stakeholders, a group of education leaders across the county who've identified the fact that we have a lack of driver education courses available for high school students, and this is a real issue. And I'll just make a comment about our core behaviors that we've identified and are promoting for our employees. We've said that when we, as Lane County employees, are at our best, we're demonstrating 3 core behaviors: a passion to serve, a drive to connect with others, and a focus on solutions. And Becky, in the work that she does, exhibits all 3 of those, particularly this focus on solutions. And so in focusing on this effort of the lack of driver education, Becky worked to find a solution, and ultimately, thanks to her success with the Transportation Safety Action Plan, ODOT has agreed to provide nearly $100,000 to start a program to bring driver education to rural Lane County. And the Lane County, or the Lane Education Service District, has agreed to house the program, and Becky is working closely with our stakeholder group to launch the program this year. So these are things that oftentimes quietly happen behind the scenes, and there's not a lot of fanfare. Part of what we're trying to do is identify these wonderful things that are happening and create some fanfare around them, because you all and the public need to know that we have these incredible employees who are demonstrating these awesome behaviors and delivering wonderful results. So this is an excuse for us to bring Becky before you again and recognize her great work and the reflection of the great employees that we have here. So Becky, I want to thank you for your outstanding efforts, particularly on this issue, to bring $100,000 from ODOT to support driver education for students in rural Lane County. And Dan, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
I think you've covered it well, but I just, again, thank you for all your work. You are truly saving lives. Lane County has more fatalities on its roadways than any other county in the state, and these efforts around driver's education should produce better drivers on the road and make our youth more understanding of the dangers of speeding and drinking, and will save lives. So thank you, Becky.
Yes, please.
Thank you. We're a little bit late, I think.
Sorry, Becky wanted to say, usually employees are like, please don't make me say anything. Okay, I'll come to the board meeting, but don't make me say anything. But Becky's very comfortable doing this, so if you don't mind, Commissioner Farr, she has a comment.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for all of the leadership, both the board and my direct leaders, Dan and Steve. But as Commissioner Lycan mentioned, like, your excitement about what we're doing around safety is getting the state's attention. That's why we got this funding, is they heard about the commitment that you've made. The board adopted the Transportation Safety Action Plan. You didn't have to adopt it, but you chose to adopt it. Thank you for that. And you're proud of the Fatal Crash Investigation Team. We report to you quarterly. That's an amazing thing that I'm excited about. This is a grassroots effort, this driver education. It began as just a conversation with the school districts about the lack of driver education. Lane Education Service District worked with the stakeholder group, and they hired, the ODOT funding came through, they hired the coordinator. This coordinator is working now to get driver education in the classrooms. And we're hoping to launch the program during National Teen Driver Week, which is October 21st through 27th. And so I will hopefully have more information to share with you at that time. But working with advocacy groups to help with fundraising efforts that's still needed to bridge the financial gap for families to cover tuition. Anyway, thank you so much.
Commissioner Farr.
I have nothing to say. I was going to start by saying we were a little bit late in recognizing Becky's great work, because 2 years ago, Lane Council of Governments recognized Becky as the Public Employee of the Year in Lane County. So out of maybe 12,000 or more employees, Becky was singled out at that point in time. So it's been recognized, Becky, the work that you do. It's also been recognized by the people who we all serve. Last week, we had an issue. I'll not go into much detail on it, but it was an issue, a constituent issue. They'd raise a question about a particular traffic light that is a pedestrian crossing that was not operating, and they just wanted to know why. Well, within minutes, literally minutes, Becky was on it. By the way, I'm going to show this picture right here of Becky accepting the award, by the way. No. But within minutes, Becky was on it, and I received this message this morning. Is regarding a pedestrian crossing near a school in the city of Coburg. And this is SIC, S-I-C. The lights are working at the crossing. Thanks for getting this up and running. Pays to have friends in high places. Parents are quite happy, thanks again. And to have friends in high places, that is really nothing to do with what happened. What happened was I called and Becky made it happen. Sorted through it was a complex issue. And the bottom line is the kids are crossing safely. That's just a tiny illustration of the work that you have demonstrated in each experience that I've had with you, Becky, whether you're there at MPC, Metropolitan Policy Commission, wherever you are. We can all count on you being responsive immediately and getting things done. Thank you very much. And the people, the constituents in Coburg who contacted me because it was somebody I knew, thank you very much. And that word of thanks from them this morning, fresh, right? Hot off the press 28 minutes ago. Thank you.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you. I receive a lot of constituents' calls. I forward them on to you, and those issues get resolved. So thank you for that direct intervention. In some cases, it's very important. I like the education piece here. As we all know, there's the 3 E's: education, enforcement, and engineering. And Dan has a hand in the engineering piece as well, so shout out to you. I've had the opportunity these last few weeks to drive throughout my district. I see a lot of improvements, and I'm hearing in constituent calls and face-to-face opportunities where we have new road surfaces, but we also are seeing more of the rumble strips and those things, which are really well received. So the education portion, in my view, is the one thing that I'm very proud that we're stepping up, because I believe distracted drivers and lack of good driving safety education is one of the leading causes for people leaving the road or, not not having the opportunity to learn to drive as some of us, some of us older folks, we went through a lot of driving skills and classes and things. And I think as you look around on the highways, some of those skills need to be kind of polished up again among all drivers. But the education piece is of critical importance among the 3 E's, and I want to thank you for your working on this and your perspective and also your overall response. When I get those phone calls and I forward them on to you, we get a satisfactory result, and thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Becky, I really appreciate your public service. It's really been outstanding throughout all the different jobs you've had. And on this one, traffic safety is really, a component of public safety. And we think about all the different ways people can get into trouble in our society. And one of the main ones is using cars. And so many people are injured and lives are really changed for the worse often. So it's nice to see an education component. Commissioner Williams and I are blessed with some seniority. Sometimes that's a drawback, but sometimes it's an advantage in life. And he's right. We used to have driver education in public schools, and that was just a component of a public education in the state. And through various funding cutbacks and decisions not made maybe entirely by any one person, but we just have not put the societal energy and money into that we should have. So now we're seeing these things like these high rates of death on roads, and Lane County, being a large rural county, has this very bad distinction of being the worst in the state. And I think this educational effort is a component of solving the problem. Obviously, we know there's design issues with roads, and there's enforcement, and there's education, and we know from our current work on all this that there's no real easy answer, but it's nice to see that someone in the trenches that's really working toward this goal of safety is being recognized. Appreciate Administrator, Department Director in their role in making sure that happened today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I have nothing more to add than what I added, briefly in the beginning. But I will say this. I think there's a really good opportunity, and I'm hoping when you have your United Front conversations, when you go back to D.C., I fully expect a surface transportation package to be developing. And frankly, there'd be nothing better to see Becky working closely with Alex Kyler, to work closely with Mary Cronin and Brett Garson, make sure Lane County has our needs to be taken care of. Because after the November election, in January, we may right here locally have the chairman or continue to have the ranking member of transportation. Either way, it works. And that's, of course, Congressman DeFazio. And so frankly, I think this is a great opportunity. I'm hoping that I fully expect surface transportation will be the big ticket item that Congress will be discussing the next session in 2019. And frankly, this county is blessed by having somebody who's very involved in the details and really gets it. And so I appreciate the work that you've done over the years, Becky. And like I said, whether it's the task force, whether it's representing AOC on our work on the transportation package, I could always count on you and to make sure that we had the information available. Whether it's testifying before the legislature, I will tell you that David and Becky would be involved in bringing forth the details. So when I sat before the legislature, they knew the details, not only of Lane County, but let's not forget, they communicate with their colleagues around the state. And that is huge. I hope people realize how big that is, that it's just not internal, that our staff, and Becky, and I'm going to call out Becky in particular, communicates with her colleagues from around the state. And so it's amazing when you're on the same page, the things you can get done. Again, thank you for all your work.
And I'll just quickly say, thanks, Becky. Rural driver ed's really important. As we see, there's been a trend with the younger generation to put off getting a driver's license. That happens mostly urban because there is alternatives. You know, there are walkable neighborhoods, there is mass transit available. Out in our rural communities, that's not available, and those kids still want to get their license at 16. And it's where we're seeing some of the most tragic accidents, like the 4 kids from Mapleton High School that lost their life on Highway 126. So driver's ed in the rural areas is really important, and I appreciate your work on that. I can remember driver's ed when I was in high school. We actually had a paved oval track behind the high school where they held driver's ed, and different car dealerships, I guess, every year supplied the cars. In the year I took driver's ed, it was an AMC dealership, so we had a Matador and a Gremlin, and that we were driving around in little circles. So, yeah. But yeah, that's just not the way it is anymore. And I really think it's an important thing that you've gotten started here. And there's so many other ways. I got an opportunity to ride Crow Road this weekend on my bicycle, and how nice the shoulders are now, and that Centerline Rumble Strip. And I hear constantly just how great that road is, but how much safer it is than it was, which is another place we've had fatals in this county. So really appreciate your work, and you just do a great job. I can't say enough. So thank you very much, Becky, and well-deserved recognition.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And one more recognition here. I'd like to invite Chief Deputy Harold and Sergeant John Campbell up to the table. We're recognizing our Lane County Sheriff's Office inmate transport team. Now, there are 11 members of this team, and I'm going to name all of them. Sergeant Campbell is able to join us today. Thank you, Sergeant Campbell, for being here. The other 10 members are not. Why? Because they're moving inmates between the jail and the courthouse. So here we have Sergeant John Campbell. We're also recognizing Records Officer Terry Lopez, Deputy Sheriff Logan Berger, Deputy Sheriff Ken Clark, Deputy Sheriff Ben Conway, Deputy Sheriff Cody Crawford, Deputy Sheriff Bob Drew, Deputy Sheriff Carissa Grace, Deputy Sheriff Brandon Nash, Deputy Sheriff Paul Vitus, and Deputy Sheriff Tiffany Wagner. They all have really easy names to pronounce. Thank you for that. So the Sheriff's Office inmate transport team includes these 11 individuals, and they transport on average 8,000 to 9,000 inmates safely and securely from the Lane County Jail to the correct courtroom or other facility each year. 8,000 to 9,000 inmates are moved from the jail mostly to the courthouse or to another facility each year. Each day is a complex schedule that involves multiple trips to and from the jail to ensure that all of the inmates are able to attend their hearings, sentencings, parole and probation violation hearings, traffic trials, drug court, mental health court, veterans court, settlement conferences, diversion dockets, arraignments, receive transport to use services for child-related hearings and other matters. And of course, we've talked a lot about the condition of the current courthouse that we have and the challenges that it presents from a safety and security standpoint in particular. We've seen recently where the inmate transport elevator in the courthouse is down, and so inmates have to be walked through the public services building onto a public elevator to move them between floors. We've seen the challenge with jurors and the impact of moving inmates through the hallways of offices in the court where they're in close proximity to the judges and court staff. So these deputies ensure the safety of everyone in the courthouse despite those significant challenges that are posed by this aging building. One example is the lack of secure and separate hallways, which I mentioned, to move the inmates. Deputies must be hypervigilant as they move inmates through the same hallways and areas occupied by judges, witnesses, victims, employees, and members of the public. This is one of the things that we're trying to solve in the development of a new courthouse so that we don't have that lack of safety, security, and privacy that exists there. In addition to managing the inmates within the courthouse, the transport team takes inmates who are sentenced to prison up to Marion County. where I'll be headed later. I'm not going to the prison, but I am going to Salem later this morning, so that these inmates can be moved into the state's correction system. And they also return inmates who've been arrested in other parts of the state and other parts of the country for crimes allegedly committed in Lane County. In recent years, our deputies have traveled to Alaska, Texas, and Oklahoma to return with inmates that are being extradited back to Lane County. So here on this 17th anniversary of 9/11, and as we recognize the incredible contributions of our public safety officials in our community and throughout our country, we wanted to bring forward an unsung group of heroes that are every day taking risks and making sure that inmates are moved between these facilities and that the safety and security of the general public and people in our facilities is maintained. We want to thank you, Sergeant Campbell, Chief Deputy Harold, and our entire inmate transport team for their great work. We have these certificates here that I'm going to give to you and have you hand out to your team. But Mr. Chair, again, we wanted to bring them forward and recognize the great work. And I'll turn it over to Chief Deputy Harold if you have some additional comments you'd like to make.
I was just thinking about the core behaviors and the focus on solutions. And this team, as many folks do in the Sheriff's Office, exemplifies that. In addition to the challenges that were already outlined, within the last year, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals handed down a decision that significantly changed the way that this team needed to do business. There was not a lot of time spent wringing hands. There was meetings held to figure out what's the solution to the new change, and the team went through that change, a significant change, really well, particularly under John's leadership. And in addition to that, when the jail levy passed and we increased our housing, we didn't adequately account for the increased workload on this unit, and so we're still making some adjustments to that. But this team does phenomenal work. They come to work every day and figure out how to get the work done, so we appreciate them.
So on behalf of the board, I want to say thank you to the team. I mean, it's an important job. It's a high-risk area for the county. You know, as you move these inmates, it's an opportunity for injuries of both the public and the inmates, you know, and as a liability to the county. And the fact that we haven't seen claims come through on our transport, and even with the Ninth Circuit decision to unshackle inmates and not allow them to be seen shackled in the courtroom, it's pretty amazing that you guys have maintained that record, and I just want to appreciate that great work and the avoidance of risks that you've done. Commissioner Sorensen.
I just want to say how much I appreciate all the work that your staff does and the deputies do. I mean, this is not only a matter of protecting the deputy sheriffs from injury from inmates that might injure them, but also we've got judges to protect. We've got witnesses, people that are coming into the courtroom. You know, I guess I'm pretty attuned to this as a former prosecutor and trial lawyer, that you've got all kinds of people in those rooms, and when you have inmates there, sometimes you have people angry at the inmates, sometimes the inmates are angry at each other or angry with the people that are about to sentence them or even help them get sentenced. And so you've got all kinds of potential. I know a few years ago there was like a melee in one of the courtrooms, and I mean, it was just a lot of risk to people, and especially the deputies had to break it up. And I mean, it's just another one of these unsung hero thing that every day this group of people does this work and nobody really hears about it. And yet it's really important, because if it goes bad, it really can go bad. So I really appreciate all the great work, and thanks, Mr. Administrator, for helping us remember this too. Thanks.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I sometimes like to highlight quotes, and Chief Deputy, Sergeant, I'm going to highlight a quote that the Chief Deputy just made when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals handed down a judgment. There was not a lot of time spent wringing hands. Immediate action was needed. That is, I just wanted to state that alone proves to me and demonstrates to me that you exemplify the nature of the entire Lane County Sheriff's Department. You're sitting here, but you represent the entire department as you sit here. And the pride that we all share in the work that you do with the constraints that you face on a regular basis. You are here, sitting here for the entire department as you receive this award. Thank you very much for your hard work and for the men and women who stand behind you.
Commissioner Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I too would like to lend my thanks to you and your transport team. Very, very critical work that needs to be done to protect citizens, and an extension of that to your fellows that are out in the field as well. It's greatly appreciated. Sheriff's Department of Lane County is second to none. Just, you guys do a phenomenal job. Very proud of each and every one of you and the work that you do under tough circumstances. You know, if I were king, you would have a lot of funding, that's for sure. I'm not, but very, very thankful that there are men and women like you that get up every morning, put on your shoes, put on your uniform, and go to work protecting people. Thank you for that.
All been said.
Yeah, and I would just thank you again, and really appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you.
So I want to remind the commissioners we have 2 time certains coming up this morning, so we need to get things moving along. Any emergency business this morning?
No.
We'll move on to the consent calendar, which are items considered routine by the Board of Commissioners. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar? Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So move approval of the September 11th, 2018 consent calendar.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Lykin, seconded by Commissioner Williams. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent calendar is approved unanimously. So with that, we will move on to county administration and order 1809-1110 in the matter of amending Lane Manual Chapter 3 to transfer the authority and functions under state law for emergency management for Lane County from the sheriff and office of the sheriff to the county administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to invite Chief Deputy Harold and Dan Hurley up here. And this is this item, and Linda Cook and Lance Inglet. Linda Cook, our emergency manager, and Lance Inglet, our interim assistant public works director, are here as well. This item we very intentionally brought forward to you on today, the anniversary of September 11th. This is a conversation that the sheriff and I and others have been having for several months. It goes back several months, actually, and the sheriff has been mindful. I'm just going to make a few introductory comments, then I'm going to turn over to Mr. Hurley and Chief Deputy Harold to add to that. The sheriff has been very mindful and brought this conversation forward about the recognized need to improve the funding and profile for our emergency management function. I want to first call out Linda Cook, our emergency manager, who has done a phenomenal job with limited constraints. We all know, as has been mentioned previously here by commissioners, that the sheriff's office is stretched thin, to say the least, with resources. We talk about 3 to 4 deputies on shift to patrol a county the geographic size of the state of Connecticut. It is just, when I say this to peers around the state, they just are blown away at that fact. So we need a lot more resources for our sheriff's office to respond to public safety issues that are happening in the moment. And that really is the focus. Well, I hesitate to speak on behalf of the sheriff. That is the focus of a law enforcement agency, is responding to issues in the moment. The primary focus of a emergency management function is to plan for the inevitable organization-wide and community-wide challenges, emergencies, crises, disasters that will happen at some point. So there's oftentimes this conflict between the immediate response that a law enforcement agency is dealing with and the longer-term planning that an emergency management function is focused on. And the sheriff recognized this and brought this conversation forward. And so we've entered into that discussion. We've toyed with where is the appropriate place to be. The reality is that the emergency management function needs additional funding. And right now it is funded by grant funds and the general fund. It needs to be supported by the entire organization, by grant funds and the entire organization, not just the general fund. So that is one change that we will see. We also want to raise the profile of the emergency management function in Lane County so that it is not a function of one individual department or division, that it truly is the Lane County Office of Emergency Management. And so this proposal that you have in front of you that we're asking for the board's approval today is to shift this function to the county administrator, and then that the county administrator would delegate that the day-to-day operational authority to the department that he or she deems as most appropriate. In this case, we've determined that the Public Works Department is best equipped in the current environment to manage this function, both from a staffing and expertise standpoint, as well as a logistical, a facility standpoint with where they're located and access to space, square footage, and parking, and all of those kinds of things. So that's the proposal in front of you, but to be clear that this would be the Lane County Office of Emergency Management that would have a dotted line relationship to the Board of Commissioners and the county administrator that will work in collaboration with the organization as a whole and the community as a whole. And again, our intent is to seek additional funding, countywide funding, and additional heightened profile for that operation. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Hurley if he would add some comments, and then I'll just note for the board that in order for any function to be transferred from the sheriff's office, it requires the sheriff's consent. And so Chief Deputy Harold is here on behalf of the sheriff to share that with you. And I want, because I don't think Chief Deputy Harold will say this, nor would Sheriff Trapp say this, it is a rare occurrence that you would find an elected official in this capacity that would step forward and have the humility and leadership to say, you know, we can do better with this operation, to have the best interests of the community as a whole in mind as it relates to a function that's under the control of that entity. So I just want to call out that in my experience in 20 years in county government across the country, this is really an incredible thing that we see here with this sheriff's office, that they step up and they do what is in the best interest of the sheriff's office as a whole, the organization as a whole, the community as a whole, not just maybe the parochial interest of one thing. And so I think we need to, in dealing with this issue, also celebrate the fact that we have incredible partners in the public safety arena led by our sheriff's office.
Thank you, Steve. And Commissioners, we're excited about this proposal. We think it makes a lot of sense. I also want to recognize the tremendous work that Linda has done over the years in the Sheriff's Office with sustaining this small program. It's a very small program at Lane County with only one FTE or 1.5. Sometimes you've had help, but it has such an important function to protect the citizens of Lane County in an emergency. Important to elevate it out of the function of the Sheriff's Department and elevate it at the county level so we can garner more support across the county and the different departments. And then I think it makes sense to house it at Public Works. There are a lot of agencies across the state that have emergency management under Public Works. And Public Works has taken on small departments and divisions over the years, Animal Services, the Lane Events Center. Because Public Works has a robust system of support for administrative support, Public Works will be hiring a grants position. We'll be interviewing on Thursday, and I think that could be helping to support funding, seeking funding for this program. So there are a lot of reasons why I think this makes sense. Steve has touched on those, but we're very supportive at Public Works of this proposal. One more thing, and one more reason I wanted to highlight is that the the types of emergencies we see frequently are often public works emergencies of flooding and ice storms and things like that. So I think it will also strengthen public works to have this stronger connection with emergency management so that we can respond to those in a better way for our citizens.
And thank you, Chair and Commissioners. And I couldn't agree more with what both Steve and Dan have shared. The sheriff and I have had this conversation a handful of times over the last few years, generally around budget time, in recognition that this function really should be more robust for a county our size with the population that we have. And looking at our comparable counties and the way they are able to resource and staff this function, but also in recognition, as Steve already shared, that we're also looking at day-to-day emergencies that we are insufficiently resourced and staffed to handle. And so the reality is in our organization, every time we look at those competing interests with limited resources, until we find a way to be able to respond to the daily calls for service requests, that's really an emergency response, emergency management hasn't received any additional resourcing. And so, as has been shared, we looked at it and thought that there's probably a better way. Obviously, emergency management touches every one of the county departments, and as has been shared, it makes sense that it be a county-wide function and organization. So we're happy that we're able to come together and make this recommendation to the board. Want to assure you, of course, that the Sheriff's Office is always going to be a very strong partner with emergency management in Lane County. Anytime that there's been, particularly what we experience are more natural hazards, the Sheriff's Office is maxed out operationally when we have a flood or a fire with our resources, but certainly will be a part of that planning process and will always be a strong partner as a department with this Office of Emergency Management. And want to acknowledge Linda Cook's work in particularly, about 16 years of slugging away in a single FTE position inside an organization that is pretty maxed out operationally without that robust support that we're hopeful Public Works can provide. We've, through the years of losing line staff, we've also lost a lot of our support structure, and we still run quite lean when it comes to that, trying to focus on those frontline resources, deputy sheriff resources. And so having some more support available to the person doing this work, I think, well, and Linda and I have talked about it. I'm very impressed with the way she's continued to come to work each day and tackle this workload on her own without feeling that sense of support that we haven't been able to provide, really. So, and then I forgot to mention at the beginning of my remarks, Sheriff Trapp, of course, wishes he could be here, but was unavailable today, so I get to sit in. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first question I have, are other counties doing this? And if so, do you have a list or off the top of your head, maybe if some counties that are close proximity or whatever the case may be?
Linda generated a list for me. I can't remember how many were on there. Do you know? Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is top of the mind, but I think I've got it. We have 5 comparator counties: Clackamas County, Washington, Marion, Jackson, and Deschutes. Jackson, I'm going to start with the easy ones. Jackson and Deschutes retain it in their sheriff's office. Marion County is the only one that has it solely in Public Works. It's direct to Public Works. And Clackamas and Washington have it in county administration, as I recall.
Perfect. That's really what I needed to know. And just I didn't think we'd be the lone wolf, but I was kind of curious to see, and I think bringing up the comparative counties is really important, and it just kind of puts me a little bit more ease as well. But I just wanted, it's just kind of wanted to kind of get a general thought of what the other comparable counties are doing. So I appreciate that.
Would it be possible for me to make one other comment, because I don't know when the opportunity will arise? I'm pretty much echoing everything that everyone has already said, but I've been, as chief, Harold has mentioned, I've been a long-term employee of the Sheriff's Office, and so it's with mixed emotions that this move is happening for me. And so I think it does bear recognizing, the chief already did call this out, but I do think it bears recognizing that through recognition and acknowledgement that the Sheriff's Office has been at the front of every single major incident that we have encountered, and they've been in partnership with Fire and EMS and Public Works and hospitals and utilities. They have been there as best they can. And at the same time, as I am really sad to seeing the program leave the Sheriff's Office because it's been such an honor and a privilege to work there, at the same time, I'm mixed because I'm also incredibly excited that it's being transferred to the direction of Mr. Mokrzycki, because to me, this is a seminal moment for emergency management, and I think it's going to be able to go to places Lane County has never seen in its history. And I think the timing is right, and I'm also very, very excited about that.
Commissioner Farr.
Ms. Cook, I'm glad you stepped forward and said those words, because I was just going to mention that I doubt that your work will change significantly, other than what you just mentioned, going places that you've never been able to go before. Because you are, as we all know, highly acclaimed, not just inside of our county, but inside the entire state for the work that you do. That our emergency management plan is head and shoulders in many ways above anything else in the state. And of all the comparator counties, none of them, as you do, have to deal with tsunamis. Right. We're the only one that has that going for us. So thank you very much for your work, and thanks for stepping forward, because that was very timely. I just wanted to recognize you. We seldom get an opportunity to look you face to face and say thank you for the work that you do, for not just for us, but for 360,000 people in this county and even beyond the borders. And Mr. Mokrzycki, very quickly, in your experience in 20 years of county government across the nation, you've never seen this type of selfless action by an elected official. I thank you for saying those words. A lot of people in the community don't understand that the Sheriff's Department is a completely autonomous and separate department with a different elected chief than the County Board of Administrators. And for that kind of cooperation, recognizing that the work can be more thoroughly done, perhaps, in Public Works with a robust support staff that Public Works can provide, that takes a great deal of internal, maybe sacrifice, certainly fortitude. And as Ms. Cook pointed out, after years of working with the Sheriff's Department, it's not an easy step, but one that much thought has gone into. So thank you for bringing this forward. Chief, thank you for being here today.
Commissioner Sorensen, and I'll just remind you, we are delaying a time certain right now.
I'll make it brief. I just wanted to thank Ms. Cook for her service. It's just really been outstanding, not only in Lane County, but statewide. To the Sheriff's Office, I think this is a really amazing moment where in an organization that has a fair amount of bureaucracy, that we're seeing a leader step up, you and the sheriff, among others, to say maybe this could be done differently, maybe it could be done better with someone else working on it. We know that the involvement of the Sheriff's Office in any kind of planning and solving of an emergency is going to be paramount, as we've seen. And last but not least, I think that Mr. Hurley, Mr. Mokrzycki, the people that are going to make more of the decisions in the planning, emergency management planning, I think this is a really great opportunity to show how we can, all work together to get things done. Last but not least, I represent a very leafy, dry district. And I know that around here, we talk a lot about rural Lane County, and certainly we've got at least 2 great protectors, if not more, for rural Lane County. But when I see a city like Reading, almost destroyed by wildfire, and we got a lot of very dry, leafy trees, not that I'm calling out my neighbors, but their trees are hanging over my house right now. We got to really plan for this, because this could be really big if we get the big fire and we get the very dry. And so anyway, every day is emergency management planning as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
I'll try and be brief, because emergency planning and emergency management's a big issue for me, and resilience in general. We spent had a 2-hour public safety meeting up at AOC, and we spent an hour and 45 minutes on emergency management in that meeting, talking about it, everything from meeting with Senator Boquist to IPAWS and other aspects of emergency management. As we face the 2021 Worlds coming to town and look at, what it takes, moving this from the Sheriff's Department into county administration makes a lot of sense. One of the things people don't understand, and this was kind of hammered home because I was also there for the public natural resources and public lands meeting, and we had a presentation from ODF on the 2018 fire season to date, because it's not over yet, was just how much it takes to support those guys after the event even. And one of the things the ODF representative talked about is they'll spend the next 8 months doing the accounting on each fire incident. And that accounting support doesn't come out of the sheriff's office. It comes out of county administration. The logistics during, and the ability to reach for resources, is beyond just the sheriff's office. We need to be able to reach into every part of the county. And not all emergencies are, the standard ones people think of, a police and fire type response. There's also the public health emergency of a contagious disease outbreak. So there, we have all sorts of things to be concerned about. And as we look at the 2021 Worlds coming, this is an excellent move. I have one quick question, because you didn't say it directly, but could you definitively answer, has Sheriff Trapp consented to moving this?
Yes, he has. Sheriff Trapp consents to moving emergency management out of his office to the county administration.
Yep. Just wanted to have that on record, because that is a requirement when we do move something out of the sheriff's office as it being an elected sheriff, and have to have his consent to move a duty out of the office. So I appreciate that. With that, I would look for a motion. Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I can move approval of Order 1809-1110 in the matter of amending Lane Manual Chapter 3 to transfer the authority and functions under state law for emergency management for Lane County from the sheriff and office of the sheriff to the county administrator.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Lykin, seconded by Commissioner Williams to approve Order 1809-1110. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone. And with that, we're going to move to our 10 o'clock time certain, 7 minutes late. I apologize to the folks from Extension. We will give you your full time. And we have some faces that have changed a little bit, so if you guys will introduce yourselves. And
Thank you, Commissioner Brozovich. My name is Richard Riggs. I'm the Regional Director for the Western Region, which covers all the way from McMinnville down to here, so Yamhill, Lane, Benton, Lynn, Polk, Marion, and Yamhill counties. It's a big region. Lane County joined the Western Region as of July 1st. I came on board on the very end of May, so I'm fairly new in the position, and the region has realigned itself. I want to thank you for your past support of Extension. I know our position at Kaufman House is very generous there. Your support of our local option levy in the past years, and then as we move forward, hoping to come forward, with more support going forward. We do a lot of great work. I brought a faculty member here, Emily. She's going to talk a little bit about 4-H. Myself, I grew up in this county. I'm a Oak Ridge native, so I'm very happy to have Lane County as part of my region, especially in this role, because I know Extension can do a lot of work in those more rural parts of the county, and I'm very excited that as we move forward. I just had a conversation with some of our master food preservers before coming over here to learn about the work that we have been doing up in those areas from Oak Ridge to Florence and everywhere in between. So, but we're just going to talk about 4-H today, and I'll turn it over to Emily.
Thank you. I'm Emily Anderson. I'm the 4-H Youth Development Educator. This is my 7th year with Oregon 4-H, but I've only been in Lane County for about 3. I came on board just before the campaigning started for this new tax levy, so I've kind of seen the before and after, and that's where I want to focus today is what the support has really done for our programming. So I'll talk about some of the enrollment statistics and the new programming and new staffing that we were able to bring on thanks to that funding, and then looking ahead what we hope to accomplish in the future. So our enrollment statistics, we've had a 33% increase in youth participation since the tax levy. So that's thanks to our new staffing and our new funding for educational programs. We went from 328 youth engaged in our programming to 425 this past year. That includes 130 youth in after-school programs, and that's all brand-new programming thanks to a new staff member who's able to focus on just those non-traditional programs. So to clarify a little bit, my role is to provide leadership over the county-wide program, but I really focus on county fair, enrollment, volunteer management, all those traditional kind of 4-H pieces that are in every county. But then this new faculty member can start new programs and focus on those non-traditional kind of additional value-added pieces. So we're on track for additional growth this year. We've already seen a lot of new volunteer applications in the office, and I'll explain a little bit about why we're seeing that growth coming in the next slide. So another reason is that we've been able to decrease the enrollment fees from $100 to $70 thanks to this new funding. So I think that's made our programming a lot more accessible to those lower income families. We also offer scholarships to those who can't afford the $70 as well. But that decrease has made a lot of people very happy, and we're grateful to be able to do that. We've also eliminated the volunteer fee. Before, we were requiring new volunteers to pay $25 to sign up. When I got here, I thought that was kind of crazy because they're volunteering for us, so we don't want to charge them. But I understood that we were really in a hard spot funding-wise, so we're able to attract a lot more volunteers now that we don't need that funding as much. I should also say our adult volunteers have grown slightly from 73 in 2016 to, at last count, we had 83 last year. So it's kind of a slow move. That's what we really need the most is more volunteers, but that recruitment piece is kind of challenging sometimes. So we have a lot of new programming, and as I said, our educational program assistant was the first thing we did when we got this this money from the tax levy, was hiring a new person. So she's full-time, and she's funded from the county, and she's started a bunch of new programs that I'll go through in a minute. But we were also able to take on a student worker. She's part-time all through last year and then into this summer, and she's been amazing. And we're paying her out of the enrollment fees, so that's not even coming out of county funding. And then we took on a naturalist educator for one of our programs, and we were able to leverage grant funding there. And we have a lot of new marketing strategies through social media with our new staff and a few other strategies. So going through some of our new programs, Junior Master Naturalist, I think, is kind of the biggest and most exciting. As far as I'm concerned, attracting the most new members. So it's grant funded. It's a grant called STEM Beyond School. So that brought in funding for our new naturalist educator who is just part-time. This program is modeled after a nationwide adult program, Oregon Master Naturalist, and we've developed our own curriculum for youth, and I think we we had 3 cohorts running simultaneously in 2016 that brought in 40 different youth members, and then just last year we increased to 5 cohorts with 60 youth participants. So they're learning about outdoor science, they're doing some classroom experience with science experiments, and then they're going outside at least once a week to experience kind of the local landscape and do more hands-on learning. We also, along with that, did a multi-county spring break camp for the first time. So we went up to a 4-H camp facility in Salem, and we took 30 youth up there for 3 nights, I believe, and put on a really great camp for them. So we expect that to continue. It was very popular. We had a winter workshop series as well, so that was kind of a recruitment and educational opportunity for existing and future members. So we had a whole range of things, the livestock and small animals, cooking, just a whole range of things. We also worked with our master food preservers, master gardeners to put on some workshops, and that went throughout the winter. I think it was Saturdays. And then a new embryology program. We have an embryology, gosh, I should have remembered what this was called. We rotate eggs for 21 days and they hatch chickens. And so we were able to take those to libraries. We had them in 4 different libraries and really successful. Almost all the chickens hatched, and we reached thousands of local youth through the libraries, which is sort of a new partnership for us, and they loved it. And moving forward, we're spreading them into schools. We just sent out an announcement, I think it was yesterday, about this opportunity for schools to pay, I think, $25 to get all the supplies, the eggs, and feed for the chickens once they're born. And we've already had 6 schools since this morning express interest in having that in their classrooms. So that's a pretty exciting new program and kind of low maintenance and low expense for us. We've done a lot with older youth leadership. So kids have the opportunity to be club officers when they're younger, and then they can move into a junior leader training, be junior leaders in their club, and then they can join me for a lane leadership team, which meets once a month, and it's our 12-year-olds and up. And they have leadership lessons every year or every month, and then they can be county ambassadors beyond that. So we went from having 2 ambassadors the past couple years and just a few other lane leadership team members to having 25 members sign up for lane leadership team and 5 ambassadors. So that program is growing exponentially. It's really exciting to see all these kids getting excited about leadership. Let's see what else. Junior Master Gardener. That's a really exciting new program too, and also a partnership with our in-house Master Gardener program. So our adult Master Gardeners are teaching our 4-H youth horticulture, and we're doing this through the schools right now. So Calapooya and Oak Hill both had programs reaching over 30 youth this past year, and that was just kind of testing the waters to see if there was interest. And this coming year, we're adding a whole nother site there at our extension office with volunteers and staff bringing on kids from all different schools. So we expect that program to be growing as well. We also have new community clubs. So as you probably know, we have large community clubs in each area of the county, and I think we went from about 9 to 11 or maybe even 12 this year. So that's pretty exciting because it offers 4-H to new communities and new rural areas that weren't being reached before. Lots of growth in fair too. I usually kind of skip over fair because that's something we do really well every year that everyone kind of knows about. But State Fair we really promoted this year because we're so close to Salem. We really wanted to encourage our local youth to go represent Lane County at the State Fair. And this year we went so last year we had 118 entries, and that's static entries as well as animal science exhibits, 118 to 145 this year. So we had far more kids go with their animals and spend the week this year than we have in many years past. So that's been exciting. So looking ahead, a lot of great ideas for this year and the future. We're putting together a 4-H Fall Conference for November 3rd, and that's where we'll go to the WOE Fairgrounds in Cottage Grove and spend the whole day with a big series of different workshops and events. So last year we kind of struggled with our workshop series because it was just a 1-2 hour workshop here and there. So it was a big commitment for our families to drive into town and spend 2 hours at a time. So this year we're going to do it all at once, where we have a series of workshops and educational events and community service and feed them lunch and do some recruitment all in one day. So we're lining up presenters, and kids can choose which classes each time slot that they want to take. We're excited about that. We're adding a robotics club. That's been one of the biggest interests, and we just haven't been able to get leaders to, volunteers to lead a robotics group. So we finally decided we're just going to do it. The staff is just going to do it because it's such a big need. So I actually found one of my teen ambassadors with a lot of robotics experience. He's the kid in the middle there who just went to a national contest with robotics. He's going to lead it with me since he has the experience. So we're excited to finally be able to offer robotics. Outdoor Explorers, that's a program I started in Klamath County that was really popular, where we took kids out for just outdoor recreation. So we focused on fitness and and some career development, some career exploration. So I introduced them to biologists and professionals in the natural resource field. So we're going to start that here this year. We have a whole new series called Health for Better Living, where we're promoting the fourth H in the 4-H's, health. I think a lot of times that gets overlooked. So we're doing a lot of educational programming around health and encouraging each club to do health activities in their meetings. So a lot of programming around health. And then Interstate Exchange is one that we'd like to start up this year as well. There's been some interest, and that was the most impactful program I participated in as a youth, so I'm really hoping this will take off. It's where we partner with another county in another state, and we do an exchange. So one summer, they'll come and stay with us, and then the next summer, we go and stay with them. So it's homestays. It's kind of a cultural experience for them to learn about another part of the country. So coming up, we have National 4-H Week, the first week of October, and we'll do a big kickoff barbecue for that, kind of a meet and greet with leaders and members, and then a recognition banquet for this past year in November. So we're looking forward to those events. And the past few years, we've just really focused on tightening up a lot of our policies and procedures and programming and kind of streamlining things. And we're in a really good place right now to just take off with new programs and growth. So I'm excited about that. We're looking for more opportunities for urban and historically marginalized communities, and I'm hoping we can grow in that direction in the future since we're really taking good care of our rural families right now. I think we need to do more in Eugene proper and provide more services to those who aren't traditionally 4-H members. But with all of that, we need volunteers, so that's kind of the big push right now is volunteer recruitment so we can keep expanding and growing. That's everything I have for you today, and I'd welcome any questions or suggestions for me about 4-H or Rich as well for more countywide and region-wide questions.
Commissioner Farr.
Wow, that's amazing. That 33% increase in membership, that's amazing. Remarkable numbers. I hope you continue that trajectory. That is, and you attribute that in no small part to the levy that was passed, the ongoing cereal levy. That's pretty exciting. You know, I grew up in Tillamook County where there are more cows than people, and 4-H was a part of a school curriculum, you know, so it was, I don't think it was actually a class, but it felt like it was. And the Future Farmers of America, of course, everything was tied together. But the county fair was a really integral part of that. And one thing I'd like to say, and I'll look at Mr. Rickoff as I say this, is the partnership between Lane County Fair and Extension 4-H that has been rejuvenated in recent years. It's really pleasing to see that. Because a lot of kids, you know, they focus, in Tillamook County, they certainly did focus a year on showing at the fair. And showing at the fair is an opportunity for a lot of people to see things that they otherwise wouldn't see, and for kids to really highlight the things that really are deep in their heart. But beyond that, and beyond the involvement with Lane County Fair, I'm going to talk about Kalapuya High School and what you've done at Kalapuya. These are kids who otherwise would not be going to school. And you're giving them reasons to go to school. The Junior Master Gardener program that you've established out there that is thriving at Kalapuya with the gardens that they have, the farm to school to food, farm to cafeteria, farm to food, farm to school program is really robust out there, and in no small part because of the expertise that you lend to the program. You know, they have a motto out there, and that's love food, not waste. And that really is deep in the hearts, because many of these kids do go on to college who otherwise would not have finished high school, but some of them go directly into trades. And one of the trades that they go into potentially is landscaping, and you have a sustainable landscape program that you guys participate in, that you help kids learn the ins and outs of a sustainable, organic, and local native plant landscaping. That really, a lot of those kids, that you see that things light in their eyes when they get their hands dirty and soil into their fingernails, and the work that you all do out there, it goes far beyond saying 4-H is a great thing. You're changing lives. You know, you're making lives extend into the future that otherwise would not potentially have even gone through high school. And I'm just pointing to Kalapuya, which is a tiny part of what you do, but it's a huge thing that you do for those kids who are engaged. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We love working with Kalapuya. their staff is amazing, and they're just so open to any kind of programming we have to offer, and just really easy to work with them and do collaborative programming. And I did skip over a comment I wanted to make about our fair and working with the fair board. We've come a long ways, as you said. Yeah, and the fair board this year has made the decision, so they've always, I guess in the past few years since 4-H funding went away, they picked up youth programming so that the youth still had a way to participate in the fair. So they were running a similar kind of youth program, and just this year we worked together to kind of combine that so that we could take that off of their plate. And that's one of the reasons we expect 4-H participation to grow considerably this year, because all of those kids that were in the open youth program with the fair board will now have the opportunity to join 4-H and work through us. So it's been a great partnership and relationship building with the fair board and the fair staff as well.
Brilliant. And I'll point out that Commissioner Williams is our representative to the fair board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. You know, a lot came flooding back into my memory of when I was a younger person. I know 4-H has always been a presence in the rural communities, Cottage Grove for one. You mentioned WOE Fairgrounds in your presentation there. That's really exciting. My experience was in high school, actually with Future Farmers of America, and there's a lot of similarities between the two organizations. And most of the kids in the class in Future Farmers were also FAA or 4-H kids of interest as well. And so there was some of the most valuable lessons I learned were in those types of settings. I learned to weld. Imagine that. And I don't know if that's a part of the Extension Service, what you do. I'm very proud of what you do at the Extension Service, and I'm very, very pleased that the citizens of Lane County found value in what you do as well and supported. And I hope they continue with that support and perhaps even in a greater way. But it's a pleasure to serve with you on the Fair Board. And these reports, I'll close with the scholarships that are offered. You went from $100 to $70 and you have scholarships. And I, for one, would like to know a little bit more about how I might participate in that scholarship opportunity. So we'll talk about that perhaps the next Fair Board meeting and see how we can, how I can further engage in that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great presentation. Really appreciate it. I was involved in 4-H when I was young, and it was actually a great experience for me personally. You know, when you have to care for your animals, it teaches great discipline. And just really, I think, sets a really good foundation overall. I grew up in Douglas County. And of course, Douglas County Fair still to this day has a very strong 4-H FFA presence. In fact, when I was in high school down in Roseburg, it was always interesting to see the kids wearing their Letterman's jacket and other kids wearing their FFA jackets. And it was and given the reputation of Roseburg High School in football, that says a lot. And but there was a part of your presentation I'm really curious about, and robotics. I think that's really impressive. And given the really how we're looking at moving forward very strongly on CTE, how did 4-H get more engaged in robotics? Because frankly, I think it's a really great idea. And one last comment I'll make before answering. A friend of mine from high school went on to actually manage, or he's manager of a big cattle ranch in Utah. And of course, they had BLM grazing rights, and that's where the cattle graze. But the ranch itself was about 3,000 acres in southern Utah. It's real big. But this was back in the 80s, and they were computerized then. And people don't realize ranching has become a very high-tech industry. And it's just so you never know. But if you could comment on robotics, because I frankly find that to be impressive, and I really salute you on moving forward in that.
Thank you. I'll be honest, robotics is pretty new to me. I don't know a lot about robotics, but I do know we get calls constantly from families saying, my child is interested in robotics. Do you have anything? So 4-H nationwide and Oregon specifically really works hard to keep up with current trends in education and communities, and STEM is big right now. And I happen to be the statewide STEM chair for Oregon 4-H, so I was just at State Fair watching all of these really interesting robotics and technology and engineering exhibits come in, and I was just blown away by what's coming in from around the state. And so I thought, I've got to get our county on board with this because there's so much there, and we have curriculum for it and everything. We just didn't have a leader. Adults are afraid of it. I mean, I have been. Like, I don't know anything about robotics. How am I going to teach this? But the kids are not afraid of it, and they know what they're doing. So Braden in the picture, I've been hearing him talk about state contests and national contests, and so I just asked him and his parents one day, like, is there any chance you would just lead this if I, provided the space and found the kids? And they were all over it. So it worked out great, kids leading kids, and he's one of my teen ambassadors as well, so it'll be a great experience.
I find it impressive, and the Springfield School District, to me, has done a very good job on really promoting CTE. In fact, Hamlin Middle School, the brand-new middle school, really has an impressive program there right now. In fact, my oldest son works there, and he was telling me last year there was a young man who was 13 years old, developed an app for the teachers and for the educators at the Hamlin Middle School.
Wow.
13. He just developed it himself, and there it was. And so I'm not surprised. Kids are not afraid of this at all, and it's just second nature. So I'm glad you're encouraging that because it's such a big part of the future, and glad to see 4-H engaged. Thank you.
So first, before I forget, could you email your slideshow to us, and I'll see if I can get it attached to our agenda online so people can see it also. Also, you reeled off a whole bunch of stats about growth in various programs, everything from the ambassadors and leaders to participants in this program or that. You must have some notes.
Yep, sure.
You wouldn't mind emailing those also, just so we can because I can't write as fast as you were speaking, I don't think. But just those two things, if you wouldn't mind getting those to us. And then I just want to say, if you're looking for help with your robotics and all that, robots are basically set up on some kind of programmable logic controllers and various things like that. There's a whole bunch of people that sit around in eWeb working on stuff like that called electrical engineers. So you might want to talk to the folks at eWeb, maybe. You might want to talk to the folks at Johnson Crushers. What's the what's the guys that make the corn equipment there off of Chambers? There's a fair amount of manufacturing firms. You may even want to talk with the folks out at Seneca Sawmill. Have a bunch of if nothing else, it's not their engineers, but even their electricians that do nothing but work on those high-tech manufacturing equipment. Because basically the robots the kids are building are the very primitive versions of what these guys are working on daily, that do tasks. And that's kind of what you're teaching them. So that's, if you're looking for folks to kind of teach that, that's really, go with the guys that do that professionally.
Great recommendation.
Yeah, so try, if you get with some of those folks, and I'm sure, and particularly at eWeb, I know that there's just a strong culture of volunteering in that, having worked there myself, so in the engineering department. But I'm a civil engineer. I know enough about programmable logical controllers to get in real trouble.
Great, thank you.
So just a suggestion on the robotics help if you're looking there. So I really appreciate the work you guys are doing and working on everybody's 4-H's there. What is it? Head, hands, heart, and health, right?
Very good.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I had to look that up. So.
Very nice.
Any other comments from the board or questions? Well, I want to thank you for the presentation and the update. I guess we'll see you in a few months.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So that gets us to item 7C, which is a draft letter regarding Lane County comment on Oregon Smoke Management Plan rulemaking. And we have Alex Kyler, our Intergovernmental Relations Manager. Mr. Kyler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Before you, you should have a packet that describes the item. This is an item that came about fairly quickly. There's a deadline for comment to be submitted to the state on September 14th. And it sort of came to my attention as a result of the presentation that you had about a week ago from staff at Lane County Public Health in responding to the issue of wildfire smoke incursions into Eugene, Springfield, and greater Lane County and greater Oregon regions. Chair Bozovich spoke a little bit to a meeting that was held yesterday up at AOC. The Natural Resources Committee did have a presentation by staff on from ODF, the Oregon Department of Forestry, on the fire season, and I just wanted to share with you a couple of quick statistics from that meeting. Last year, 2017, was a record wildfire year in Oregon with 665,000 total acres burned. This year so far, 113 acres have been burned as of a couple days ago, so that's a number that continues to climb. We've seen average fire season length grow 78 days since 1970. We spent in Oregon statewide in 2017 $454 million on fire suppression alone. The state of Oregon, in terms of the lands they protect, ODF, their average costs over the last 10 years are about $42.8 million a year. This year, they're already at $87.3 million for gross costs. So, I mean, just gives you a couple of statistics about the size and severity of this year's wildfire season. I thought that the opportunity to comment on smoke management was worthy because the smoke management plan is only updated once every 5 years. So the issue is that Oregon is required to have a smoke management plan under the Federal Clean Air Act, and it's supposed to update it every 5 years. So it was last updated in 2012. This year, they are updating it. And the Oregon Department of Forestry and the Oregon DEQ coordinate on that because while the Department of Forestry has authority for the plan, the DEQ is the one that has to submit it to the feds under the Oregon Clean Air Act. Couple things. The Department of Forestry did put together a committee to look at particularly the objectives of the plan before promulgating these rules, and they really rely on the underlying statute at ORS 477.013 to develop the smoke management plan. But the committee did a couple of things this year after looking at 477.013 and another statute at 477.552, both of which speak to maintaining air quality objectives. So the objectives of this year's plan were to minimize smoke emissions resulting from prescribed burning, provide maximum opportunity for essential forest land burning, protect public health by avoiding intrusions, coordinate with other state smoke management programs, comply with state and federal air quality and visibility requirements, and promote the further development of techniques to minimize emissions by encouraging cost-effective utilization of forest land biomass, alternatives to burning, and emission reduction techniques. So prescribed burning is really just one tool with respect to a community response to wildfire. It is mostly practiced around the urban forest land interface, and so communities like Bend and Ashland in particular have been very interested in this opportunity. They've commented, some of their fire chiefs have commented on these on the smoke management plan. And the Department of Forestry does maintain sort of a rolling list of folks who have commented on the plan. So I was able to review some of the comments already that have been already submitted. And at least my observation was, by and large, the individuals who have responded thus far have been very much willing to accept more smoke intrusions in the wintertime months if it could have an impact on the wildfire season in the summertime. And I think that was an interesting observation. It's purely anecdotal, but when you look at the statute, the underlying statute that describes the presence of and the need for the smoke management plan, it really doesn't speak much to a link between prescribed burning and wildfire management. And personally, I feel like that is something that needs to be looked at more closely within the realm of the legislature to see if that's an opportunity to make that tie better. Certainly we make, at least in the draft that I prepared on your behalf, we make that comment that there needs to be a better tie between prescribed burning and wildfire outcomes. There is some reporting that comes out of the smoke management plan. So they annually produce a report on prescribed burning. I was able to review the most recent one, which is 2016. So this was really before the big fire year of 2017. They just haven't finished that plan yet. And so I was hoping to see how the department responded in that regard. The other one is that the Department of Forestry does report on the wildfire season, and they have some language about smoke for the first time in their 2017 report because of the impacts that we saw. And so in the comment that I prepared for you, I also did suggest that there is some reporting that could probably be improved to really start to look at some of the metrics around the impacts of wildfire smoke. The other comment that I tried to echo is that there were, particularly in those communities of Bend and Ashland, there was concern that while the rules are somewhat lessened in sort of bureaucratic requirements so that prescribed burning should be easier to accomplish in Oregon, there is an exemption process, for example, that's created for the first time where a community could be exempt from certain standards of smoke intrusions if they have a communication and education plan in place. Unfortunately, the language around that communication plan is not all that great. And so, for example, there's a suggestion in the rule or a procedure outlined in the rule where the community would first come to the Board of Commissioners for approval of their plan. Then the Board of Commissioners would forward that plan to ODF and DEQ, and then it says, and those two agencies would review it under advisement from DEQ, or excuse me, under advisement from Oregon Health Authority. And that's really about all it says. And so my sense was that we should comment on the lack of specificity regarding what the metrics that DEQ or ODF would use. There's no sort of understanding about what under advisement by the Oregon Health Authority means. And so I suggest you make that comment as well. I did want to note that this comment was shared with our public health staff over at H&HS, and they asked for some additional language that I'd like to read to you that would go at the end of the third bullet on your comment, which says, and it's related to the exemption process. And so they suggest, finally, the rule should provide additional specificity with respect to the timing of the application. This is the application for exemption, the duration of the approval, and renewal guidance. So none of that is actually in place in the rule. So again, there's sort of this question about, well, when do you apply? How long is that approval granted for? And how do you renew it? So I thought that was a good comment that the board should have. And then finally, I just make a point about 2021 and how this community in particular has, I think, perhaps a greater sense of urgency, or at least a unique sense of urgency around air quality issues in the summertime months. And to the extent that we can begin working on those kinds of things, this is going to be a very heavy lift in terms of impacting wildfire smoke through prescribed burning, particularly with respect to our federal partners. So that sort of summarizes my report on your comments. I would add that I made the note about the Oregon state statutes, the revised statutes being sort of inadequate, as well as the tie to the federal work. And I do think that there's some additional work that could be done on your behalf to advocate for both those things in the state and the federal milieu. We have had in the past a priority about wood smoke issues, but it was pretty specific to wood smoke issues up in the community of Oak Ridge, because there was a wood smoke task force that was created, and we actually worked that issue pretty heavily during 2017 and were successful in leveraging some new funds for the city of Oak Ridge. However, we never established a principle around wood smoke or wildfire smoke, and I think that's something that could be addressed as well. So I'll stop there.
Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Alex, thank you very much for the presentation and the letter as well. Couple things. First of all, I would strongly support the idea of kind of enhancing of what smoke, the management plan should look like from a legislative perspective. So I would strongly support this going to the legislative committee. Because when you look at the smoke management plan of Oregon, I think right now, if you were to ask the public, they would think about smoke management plan and that would encompass all the forest fires. That's not the case. When you're talking about prescribed burn, I was just leaning over with Chair Bozovich, ODF prescribed burns are happening most of the time in his district. That's where the state lands are located. And so when you see the plume of smoke out, farther past Veneta and then West Lane district, that's what that is. What's happened here in the last couple years has changed dramatically. And so we know about ODF. We know about they have a very, very good firefighting apparatus. They have the work, or they have the collaboration, the work they do with the BLM lands, the ONC lands. I'd like to see the state really move forward strongly on the good neighbor work. I would just advise our board is look at what the Good Neighbor has done in Idaho. That's a good operation they have, because Idaho is mostly U.S. Forest Service lands, and the BLM is grazing. It's not timberlands. So they have a really good neighbor policy over in Idaho, and that's a good one just to kind of take a look at what the fundamentals. But as far as the letter itself, I support. There is one little typo and add a T to SATE, and that's in the third line. So state implementation. Other than that, I appreciate the letter, but I do think that this needs to go to the legislative committee. I think that this needs to be looked at in a larger context than what's just here on the ORS books itself. And finally, I'll just state this. As we've been in some of these meetings, talking to commissioners from around the state, and I mentioned 2021 games, we get support from commissioners throughout the entire state of Oregon on that. They get it. And they understand it on how important forest management is, or how important the issue of the forest fires are and what that can mean to the 2021 games, and whether the United States ever gets them again. I mean, that's really what's at stake here. If we get a smoke out, it's likely that this country may never see them again. And so that's what's going to be really important going forward. So those are my comments, but I appreciate the letter. I think it's on par what's being asked right now. But boy, I not only in the legislative committee here, but then it will allow for commissioners to engage AOC to look at this from a legislative perspective statewide, and not just Lane County. So those are my thoughts on this, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Alex, for a fine body of work. There's a lot of information here, a lot of good, clear thinking going on. I agree with Commissioner Lycan that the legislature needs to be fully engaged in this, and they need to further ratchet up the pressures on the federal side of things. That's going to be key, and we'll just see how that plays out. Each component gets a little bit more difficult, but again, I think this is a great body of work, pretty comprehensive, and I appreciate it. So thank you for that.
Mr. Rickoff.
Chair Bosevich, Commissioners, just want to clarify that with this, the letter would move forward, but you're asking Vice Chair Lycan for the policy issues to be brought before the Legislative Committee.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I'll just say thank you, Alex, for drafting this so quickly. It's a critical issue to try and do what we can to prevent wildfire. And if we get too restrictive in the smoke management plan for prescribed burns, we actually might be causing more smoke in the state rather, than we would achieve through the prescribed burn process, which could prevent a lot of wildfire. Prevention's the best thing we can do, because once we have the wildfire and the smoke intrusions from that, we discussed 2 weeks ago all the health impacts and how there's just a whole set of our most vulnerable population that's unprotected from those impacts, where prescribed burns done with the right weather and all that can have very little impact to the public, but have a huge impact on prevention of wildfire and managing forest in a more natural way than mechanical management. So I really appreciate the letter. With that, is there a motion to approve the letter? Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move that we approve the draft letter regarding Lane County's comments on Oregon Smoke Management Plan rulemaking.
Is that with the additional sentence from?
With the additional sentence. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll second that.
Okay, so it's been moved to approve the letter with the additional sentence and the typo corrected. And by Commissioner Lycan, seconded by Commissioner Williams. Any discussion to the motion?
Just a question, if I may.
Sure.
And that'll show up as an additional bullet point. Is that the additional sentence?
It's at the end of the third.
That is.
Third bullet.
It's going to be one additional sentence right at the end of the third.
It's already there. Very good.
It deals with that same section.
Any other discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Alex. And that gets us down to announcements. Mr. Rickoff, do you have any administration announcements?
Chair Bosevich, I'm going to pass for now.
Okay, and then we'll get to county council announcements.
Morning, Chair Bosevich, members of the board. I'll be very brief. This is really just in the nature of an update to something I have been working on with the administrator and the performance auditor, and will eventually show up for you in the form of a lane manual change that will be on the consent calendar. But I thought it was important that I call it out and we discuss it in a public meeting. For some time, there's been some concern about the fact that your 3 employees have various things like time management, personal expenses, and whatnot, and it's not really within your function to personally oversee those. And in the past, that task has fallen to folks that are actually in your respective employees' chain of command, which is an awkward situation from an auditing standpoint. So what we did is we came up, the administrator, myself, the performance auditor sat down, came up with a procedure, which will be codified in the lane manual, that essentially results in cross-checking. I don't think it'll be in the manual, but essentially, I will be checking the administrator's expenses, the performance auditor will be checking, nobody will be looking at the same thing. And then what will be done is that reports will be done quarterly where we can see the cumulative effect of it, or the cumulative extent of it, and we'll each sign off that we've reviewed that and that it's appropriate and within the bounds. And so that has to do with personal expenses and the use of time management. But it's really just part of a process of being transparent and having a process and being accountable, and having and taking folks out of the awkward situation of, one of my staff approving my time management. It's just not appropriate.
Any questions about that? Thank you, Mr. Dingle.
And I understand there'll be an executive session after.
Yes, there will be.
Right.
And and we may end up running into lunch a little bit with that. So we're not quite to 11. Do you want to do your announcements before, or we still have a public, that's right, we got the first reading, setting the second reading of ordinance number PA 1363 in the matter of amending Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan to add a quarry and to the inventory of significant mineral and aggregate sites, authorizing mining and processing as provided by the Oregon Administrative Rules 660-023-0180, amending the Rural Comprehensive Plan to redesignate land from Forest F to Natural Resource Mineral NRM, and rezone that land from non-impacted forest land F1 zone to quarry and mining operations QM zone, requiring site review and proposing of the proposed mining operations pursuant to Lane Code 16257-4A through J, repealing ordinance PA 1343 and adopting savings and severability clauses, file number 509 PA 1805392. And we have Mr. Clark here.
Good morning, Chair Bozovich, Commissioners. You're stuck with me because Ms. Wright apparently is out of the office today. This, as you indicated, is the first reading of ordinance PA 1363. I'm sure the board will recall the Hazeldale Quarry application, which resulted in the board's adoption of ordinance PA 1343. That was appealed to LUBA, remanded back to the county to address some issues, and this ordinance attempts to do that. The applicant has asked us to take on that task, and so it's a quasi-judicial applicant-driven process, and the board is asked today to approve this reading, set the second reading and public hearing for September 25th at 1:30 p.m.
Any questions for Mr. Clark? If not, I will entertain a motion. Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move approval of the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing on ordinance number PA 1363 as read into the record by Chair Bozovich, and setting that hearing for September 25th, 2018 at 1:30 p.m.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing for ordinance number PA 1363 for September 25th, 1:30 times certain. Discussion to the motion. Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. And how about that? We are 3 minutes ahead of schedule. Do you have a couple quick announcements you want to make before we get to our 11 o'clock?
Chair Bozovich, Commissioners, just a quick reminder that the election season is upon us. Currently this week, the county clerk is proofing 128 different ballot styles that will be going out in the county of Lane to the 252,000 voters. And that the ballots for overseas and military will be in the mail next Friday the 21st. So the season is clearly upon us.
And I think regular ballots get mailed on October 16th.
Is correct.
Yeah. So any questions for Mr. Rickoff on that? If not, then we'll move to our 11 o'clock time certain. I think we are close enough to call it 11 o'clock, which is a presentation and discussion in the matter of presenting the Howard Beaufort Recreation Area Habitat Management Plan. And I think we've got Mr. Henry from our Parks Division, and Ed Alverson, our Natural Areas Coordinator. And I think we have a bunch of people, interested people in the audience, too.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm here today along with Ed Alverson from Parks, who will present the Howard Buford Recreation Area Habitat Management Plan. Of our 68 parks, Buford Park is our crown jewel for many reasons. It's our largest park at over 2,200 acres, and our most visited park with over 400,000 visitors each year. With so much visitation comes some unique challenges as we strive to protect the sensitive wildlife and plants that make the park such an attraction and balance the need for public recreation. Fortunately, the county, in partnership with other agencies and organizations, recognize the need to protect this valuable natural resource. A technical advisory group made up of stakeholders was formed to provide the material to solicit public input for a guiding document to direct conservation efforts at the park. Ed is here today to provide a summary of the Habitat Management Plan. In December, we'll return back to ask for adoption of the plan as a refinement to the county's Rural Comprehensive Plan. Here today, we have Jason Blazar with the Friends of Buford Park to assist us with answering any technical questions that you may have. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioners. I'll start out by giving a little bit of introduction to the cover of our Habitat Management Plan. It's been a long time in coming, and it's a thick document, but you know, a picture it takes 1,000 words. The photo comparison here is the top photo is from 1972, spring of 1972, and that is looking east towards the west slope of Mount Pisgah with the coast fork of the Willamette River in the foreground. And I happened to find this photo in the park's archives, and I thought it was really interesting because that was the year that the park was established, 1972, so 46 years ago. The bottom photo is a similar view taken at the same time of year in 2017. And you can't really see, you know, you need to put it on your computer screen and really zoom in to really see the changes. But what this photo comparison tells us is that habitats change, nature changes. Nature is not static. And it behooves us to understand these changes and decide how we want to guide them, if we want to guide them, when we are managing our public lands to provide the benefits that they provide. So in my presentation, I'm going to summarize information that's presented in more detail in the cover memo and the executive summary of the Habitat Management Plan. I'm going to start with the purpose of the plan and go into some detail on the conservation vision because that's a really important part of the plan. Talk about the planning process. It's been a long process, long time in coming, and particularly highlight the public involvement that's occurred in developing this plan. And I'll touch on some of the highlights of the cover memo as well to help you kind of understand where it's coming from. So purpose of the plan. Purpose is to really provide a vision for managing habitats at HBRA in Mount Pisgah for the next 15 years. That's the time frame that the plan is designed around. In doing so, we're building on experience from habitat improvement projects that have been implemented over the past couple of decades. That's habitat restoration projects, trails improvement projects that provide access to the habitats, and also education and interpretive facilities. So I've got the conservation vision kind of paraphrased here in 3 slides. And if you are interested in reading through it in a narrative in the executive summary, that might be beneficial as well. But the conservation vision says that HBRA will be managed to conserve and restore habitats, including prairie, savanna and oak woodland, forest, and river habitats in ways that enhance visitor experience, compatible recreation, and educational uses. And so it's really that combination of managing the habitats to enhance the site for visitors. The upland portions of the park will sustain increasingly rare Willamette Valley habitat types, particularly prairie, savanna, and oak woodland. Conifer and mixed forests where they were historically present. The lowlands and the floodplains will sustain healthy streamside and aquatic habitats and processes. Habitat restoration shall increase the quality and extent of priority habitat types, support a diversity of wildlife species, including those that were historically more prevalent, both on the site and in the Willamette Valley, and also lessen the threat of severe wildfire through reduction of dense fuels. So why does it matter? And I'll touch on some of these points. Of course, there's a lot more detail in the document itself. But when we look at prairie and savanna and oak woodland habitats in the Willamette Valley, their extent, their acreage has declined by 90 to 98% since the 1850s. And what's interesting is that HBRA is actually one of the largest single conservation ownerships in the Willamette Valley, with over 1,000 acres of prairie, savanna, and oak woodland kind of, in an aggregate sense. And also HBRA is home to numerous rare and endangered plant and animal species. The photo there is of the habitat for Bradshaw's lomatium. It's a plant that is federally listed as an endangered species. And it's been monitored by volunteers since 1991. So that's what you see in the photo, is that the volunteers are out doing their annual or semi-annual monitoring. Talk a little bit about the process and timeline, and of course, the HBRA master plan, which was adopted in 1994, is the guiding document for management of the park. Within that plan, there were objectives to develop a vegetation management plan, develop a wildlife management plan, and it really made sense to kind of combine them into one habitat management plan document. Just really kind of took a while to get that process rolling. Starting in 1999 and over the next decade, there were numerous habitat restoration projects implemented by Lane County and partners, including prescribed burns. The first prescribed burn in HBRA was in 1999. The South Bottomlands floodplain restoration project, that was a really major project to open up some side channels that had been blocked off and allow access to the South Bottomlands by high water. And then also an oak restoration demonstration project along Trail 1, which is the main trail up to the summit of Mount Pisgah. And that's really the route that the most visitors to the park take. So it was an opportunity to really demonstrate the both the importance of these habitats and what habitat restoration would look like. In terms of the habitat management plan specifically, funding was provided by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in 2008 to develop the habitat management plan. And so actually in early 2009, a technical advisory group was convened to conduct an analysis using the Conservation Action Planning methodology. That's a methodology developed by the Nature Conservancy for conservation planning. This technical advisory group, and I'll go into a little more detail, it was a group of experts with representatives from Lane County Parks, Friends of Beaufort Park, Mount Pisgah Arboretum, so stakeholders, the Nature Conservancy, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Department of Agriculture, Oregon Department of Forestry, Bonneville Power Administration, and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And this group worked together and met, I think maybe about 8 or 10 times actually to go through the initial analysis process for the Conservation Action Planning. So an initial draft was prepared and submitted to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in 2011 to fulfill the grant requirements. But it was really just a first effort. It needed a lot more work to really come to completion. And kind of what happened is we had an economic downturn and that really impacted the funding that was available to continue the process. It wasn't really until late 2015 and early 2016 that this process was resumed. Additional work on that draft habitat management plan and the second version was released for public review and comment. And then those comments, the results of the public review were digested, and a lot of changes were made to the document to come up with the version that we have now. Well, actually, a proposed version was released in early 2018, this past January. Really, we put that out to the public to show how the document had been revised. We made some additional revisions based on feedback, and that's how we came to the document that we have now. It's included in your packet. So our request will be for adoption of the Habitat Management Plan in December 2018 is when we anticipate that will be coming before you. So I want to go, that was the overview of the process, but I want to talk a little bit more about public involvement, just so you guys have a feel for the effort that's gone into this and the importance really that was realized up front of doing this. In 2009, in conjunction with the Technical Advisory Group's effort, we hosted 2 public open houses held here in Harris Hall. That was really an opportunity to engage with the public about the park, find out what people like about the habitats that are at the park, and really to help kind of provide information to the public and the park users about the habitats. Also, stakeholder meetings and information booth at the Wildflower Festival, an article in the Register Guard, some earned media. With the second round of effort in 2016, we had a more involved way for gathering public comments on the draft plan. We had an online survey that people could take that asked a number of questions, and we collected some data from that. There was about 50 responses. I don't know if it's statistically significant, but it was a good chance to get a flavor of the public's view of the document. And then we also received narrative comments from many people, and those comments were really a major part of the basis of the revisions that were made to come up with the proposed Habitat Management Plan. We had a meeting of the Technical Advisory Group. We presented to the Parks Advisory Committee multiple times. We had another public open house here at Harris Hall in May of 2016. We had park tours, earned media, print, TV, and radio stories, and also another information booth at the Wildflower Festival. So that was in 2016. Then once we had incorporated all those revisions to the draft plan, and we had the proposed plan, we posted the proposed plan on the parks website. We had another public open house here in Harris Hall in February. More print and radio stories. We reported to the Parks Advisory Committee multiple times during the spring with the results of the process and the open house. And then in June, at the PAC meeting in June 2018, they recommended that the board adopt the Habitat Management Plan. So that's an overview of the process and public involvement. There is more detail in the actual plan document as well. Now I'm going to touch on some of the highlights of the cover memo and kind of the different talking points that the cover memo format asks presenters to touch on. So starting with policy issues. Right now, habitat management projects are being conducted in the park. They're approved and authorized by parks administratively on a case-by-case basis, on an individual project basis. But we feel that having an adopted habitat management plan will ensure that future projects are priority actions, and they fit into this broader park-wide vision and also region-wide vision for habitat conservation and visitor experience within HBRA. Touching a bit on board goals, it's great to see how there are connections here. Priority 2, the Vibrant Communities priority, has the strategic initiative to pursue practices that leverage the natural environment to enhance livability and economic development. HBRA is definitely one of the crown jewels of our park system. The park really does provide opportunities for the public to recreate, exercise, and experience the local landscape. It's just a really valued asset in the community. And then priority 4, people and partnerships. You know, partnerships are really the main way that Lane County Parks manages the park, and that's the way it's always been. And particularly our partnerships with the stakeholders, the active stakeholders at HBRA, the Mount Pisgah Arboretum, Friends of Buford Park, and Mount Pisgah, which really has been a major implementer of habitat projects in most of the park, and the Lane County Sheriff's Mounted Posse, also an active stakeholder. You know, it's that partnerships piece that is really going to make the implementation of this plan happen. I'll touch on financial considerations. Approval and adoption of the Habitat Management Plan doesn't specifically have financial implications. There's not an agreement that adopting this plan commits the county to fund the work. We anticipate that most of the funding to implement the plan will come from grants and private fundraising, with county resources serving as match, either staff time or it could also be the value of timber that's sold as a part of habitat restoration projects could be part of the grant match funding. Anyway, over the years, you know, the grant funding and private fundraising has been significant. It's in the millions of dollars. I don't have a number to tell you right now off the top, but it's definitely in the millions of dollars. So that's a really big piece of how we have been operating, and we anticipate that moving forward. This is a template for working towards a conservation vision that is out there on the table that we can communicate to everyone over the next 15 years. I should also mention that having this conservation vision, I think, will really help for getting grant funding to do the habitat management. Another nuance to this is that the habitats are changing, and the window of opportunity to achieve this vision will not be open indefinitely. At some point, achieving these habitat goals will become much more difficult or costly. So that's one of the, we're at a point now where, you know, we really need to make some significant advances. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot more difficult. I should also mention that the park is part of a sort of a larger conservation area around the confluence of the Coast Fork and the Middle Fork of the Willamette. And there are other conservation land managers, particularly the Nature Conservancy's Willamette Confluence Preserve, which abuts the park on the north and northwest sides. And one of the details is that the desired future conditions map for HBRA has been matched up with the desired future conditions map from the Habitat Management Plan for the Willamette Confluence Preserve. So we're working towards making this a more seamless vision across a larger conservation area. So in terms of alternatives, without an adopted habitat management plan, we would continue to evaluate project proposals on an individual basis. Probably projects would still happen, but we would be lacking this overarching document to provide guidance to make decisions about projects, and also to serve as institutional memory for future administration of the park, future staff. And I think having an adopted plan provides some efficiency in terms of evaluating project proposals. And so there's reduced staff time. And the memos that provided the Parks Advisory Committee, we could provide those to you as well. Thank you.
Questions or comments from the board?
That was a pretty comprehensive report.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Well, first of all, this is outstanding. It really is. The amount of energy, as I mentioned earlier in response to public comment, the amount of energy that's been put into this is significant. And really trying to reconcile recreation with habitat conservation, with the conflicts inherent in habitat conservation. You've just done a marvelous job, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all the advocacy that went into, getting this to this point. So thank you.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's no surprise to anybody that I'm very bullish on Mount Pisgah. I'm reminded that my mother always called it Mount Pisky, and I think that probably goes back a long, long ways before her 92 years. But I also recognize some of the folks in the audience that have volunteered a great deal of time and effort in improvements there at Mount Buford and Mount Pisgah. So with that, I won't mention names, but they know who they are, and they know that they have not gone unobserved. So thank you for that.
Commissioner Farr.
You know, without belaboring the work, I mean, so much can be said about the work that you've done. And, you're just scratching the surface saying wonderful work. And Commissioner Sorensen, I agree with everything he said. But there are a lot of people in the room, a few people here who actually are immediate neighbors who are impacted by it. So the actual park and the recreation area itself, many people will come to visit and go home. Now, there are people sitting in this room who can visit and look out of their front door and see the recreation area. And I'm looking at Jim Evanook sitting in the back of the room, who invited me to his front door one night to take a look at the recreation area from across the Willamette River. And that was one of the most significant emotional events of my life, was standing there with Jim as using the park to death was occurring that night. And, there was an immediate response. It's taken quite a bit of deliberation and work on a lot of people's part to get us to the point where we're ready to approve the plan. But really, I'm hoping, expecting, and pleased that the neighbors have been taken into account, the ones who don't go home to a distant place at night, the ones who go home to their immediate neighborhood across the river. And I'm really, this is more than just exciting to see us get to this point and see so many people involved in what is really a deliberative plan that's taken a great deal, not just the last 5 years, but many years going into this. You say 1972 was when the recreation area was established. I talked about my visit on the Poison Oak Trail. You call it the Oak Trail. I think it was the Poison Oak Trail back then. That was my first visit. But since then, I've gone swimming in the river there. The entire area is, it really is, as you pointed out, our jewel in our crown of parks, with 209 acres of recreational capacity for people all over, not just Lane County, but beyond. So thanks for the work. I can't even begin to say enough. And Mr. Evanook, thank you for the treatment that I received that night, or the treat that I received that night. It was a hot, during corn season, as I recall, evening that really opened my eyes to the possibility of Chris using a park to death. And let's not do it. And I think this plan helps us to not do that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to kind of piggyback on your comments you just made that in 2-3 years, we're going to be looking at the master plan for the park. And I think it's going to be important to collaborate and work with the neighbors as well whenever we go through the public process of that plan. So just want to emphasize that.
Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I really have nothing more to add. I think you've heard a lot of glowing thank yous, but I do want to say thank you for really talking about and explaining the importance of having a habitat management plan in place, especially when talking about projects and how important that is. And I think that's, first of all, it's very efficient, and it just makes a lot of sense instead of having to go and go boom, boom, bump, and instead you have a cover of an entire management plan. And I do appreciate that was to me, when you're looking at your entire presentation, honestly, that was something that really stuck out because of why the importance of this when you're going to be moving forward on the different projects that are going to occur. So I appreciate that. It was a very, very good explanation of that. And in the public that maybe is watching today, or if hopefully they'll watch in the future, will really pick that up and understand this is really, really key into the future of this, of the habitat management plan and what it means to our community. So appreciate that. Thank you.
So I want to just thank you for your work on this plan and for the public process and how in-depth that was. Because one of the things, we've been criticized in the past sometimes, the county is not involving the public in some of our decision-making. And I think this was clearly done with the public's interest in mind and plenty of opportunity for public comment, and still more opportunity because we won't actually take action till later this year on the plan. So this is just a presentation today, not a decision point. So as folks have time to read and digest and have more comments, they still have an opportunity to influence the plan as it's not formally adopted yet. So I just want to remind folks of that. I have one quick question, as I think about this, I kind of think a little bit more globally sometimes and a little bit more regionally, and my interest in trying to realize a more regional vision of the Rivers to Ridges plan and how this park fits into that. And one of my questions is adopting this habitat plan in any way going to preclude pathway connections to Springfield's, the path that comes out from the Doris Ranch area along the river. And I know there's other issues about getting across some of the restoration work of other ownerships. I'm not going to talk about that today, but as far as if we were to manage to cross that bridge, so to speak, and figure out a way to elevate a pathway and all that stuff across that restoration work and make a connection, bringing that pathway through to CV Loop would be a huge, important connection to the area-wide recreation vision of that Rivers to Ridges connections, and getting then ultimately down CV Loop and back up into the Eugene Ridgeline Park system, so that you could ultimately somewhere in Thurston, you could be recreating in their ridgeline and end up in South Eugene eventually, on a mountain bike or hiking or however. So does this management plan in any way have any preclusion on that ultimate master plan for the park and any ultimate connections regionally?
No, I'll answer that. I really don't think it does. It fits in really well with our master plan. In fact, one of the goals is connectivity. And so connecting our parks with other Lane County parks, but also other agencies like Willamette Lane and the city of Springfield. So I think it fits in really well with that, with the master plan. But the habitat management plan will help us make sure that when we're making that connection, that we're keeping the habitat in consideration while we're doing that.
Just one specific detail. If a bridge crosses the Middle Fork from the trail on the north side of the Middle Fork, the likely spot would line up with to the edge of the park, the north edge of the park. It's basically an old road. So it would be connecting with what is now a trail, but so there really wouldn't be any habitat impact to connecting to the park that way.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, I just really appreciate the work you've done, as witnessed by the fact that we had Mr. Orsinger and Mr. Van Appel here, both testifying from the Friends and the Arboretum in support of the plan. We all received an email from Ellen Otani, who's our parks gadfly, supporting the plan. Yeah, so we're hearing from all the various folks support, which means you've done a lot of good outreach and work with the public, and I really appreciate that work. Any other comments or questions from the board? Thank you for the great work. So with that, we're down to item 10A, which is Commissioners' Business and Announcements. Any announcements from Commissioners? Commissioner Lycan.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So this week, the Lane Act will be in Florence. And so it's kind of nice to always to look at, so we're not just located at the ODOT offices here in town, but instead we'll be in Florence. And there won't be a tour this year, but the current chair of our act, of course, is Mayor Joe Henry of Florence. And so it's nice that the folks who actually live in Florence don't have to travel this time. Folks that live in Oak Ridge may have to travel a little bit further, but it's always great to get out of the urban area and get to other parts of Lane County for some of these meetings. And then on September 14th, there'll be an ONC board meeting, and that is in Lincoln County. So that's it. Thank you.
Any other announcements from Commissioners? Commissioner Farr.
Mr. Chair, I have an announcement and then a couple of potentially what we'd call agenda team requests, which I'll hold off on those. Just wanted to mention that Operation 365, as we know, housed over 400 veterans, and got a report last week that since Operation 365 has concluded, the actual operation, we have housed 479 veterans since Operation 365 concluded. Wow. The work of Lane County and its partners in housing homeless veterans continues. It continues at a very rapid and robust rate. Thank you.
Great. Any other announcements from Commissioners? Seeing and hearing none, then we'll move on to agenda team requests. Commissioner Farr?
This one, I'm going to look at Mr. Rickoff and maybe Mr. Johns, who's in the audience right now. I received a call from Veterans Legacy to ask me to consider asking the board for an item. There are a couple of surplus equipment items on our surplus equipment auction list that could be of use to the nonprofit, the 501c3, which is Veterans Legacy. And I'd like to ask for discussion, a little bit of discussion and possibly board action on pulling two items from that list and offering them to nonprofits, whichever nonprofit it may be. And it was Veterans Legacy that asked me to do this from that list. One of them is an old John Deere tractor that I understand has transmission problems. That's immaterial, but just coincidentally, it was the tractor that was used at Camp Alma back in the days when Alma was operating. And there's also a vegetation chipper or a branch chipper that's on that list. So I'd like to ask if we can pull those, and what mechanism do we need to pull those from that list and then potentially offer them as a transfer, or whatever it may be called, to a nonprofit. So Mr. Rickoff, or Mr. Chair, excuse me.
Yeah, I'll turn to staff because I don't know the legalities behind that sort of a transfer to a nonprofit and also pulling something off of an already advertised auction list. So I'll allow staff to address that.
Chair Bosevich, Commissioner Farr, Commissioners, we are learning as we go. It is our understanding at this point that it is realistic and fair to pull items out for consideration. There is a process set aside for transitioning items to other governmental agencies and nonprofit partners. So there is a process, and I think Michael Johns might have some more information on it. At this point, we have pulled those two items from the auction. With this conversation, it would really be our chance to see if there are head nods around the table for us to do a little bit more research. I'm not sure how much time it will take. We might have some of the answers with us right now.
Yeah, good morning, Commissioners. We've done this before. At the board's direction, we've donated to 501c3 things. It's just a form we have to fill out. We don't like to do it too much, of course, because the money we get from the sale of these items goes back into buying new equipment. The 1990 John Deere tractor is residual values negligible. We were going to ask about not $1,000 for it. The Moorbark Tornado brush chipper is worth a little bit more. We were going to ask about $25,000 for it. We've pulled both those items first from the sale. The government equipment auction is going on as we speak. The auction for the public opens next week, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So at your direction, we'll we'll move on these two items, either put them back into sale or fill out the forms to get them donated.
My request would be, Mr. Chair, to ask for head nods to pull both items and consider them for transfer to Veterans Legacy nonprofit.
I'll look to the board on that. I see one head nod, 2, 3, 4, 5, I guess. Sounds like it. Yeah, I think, I know they'll be put to good use by that group. But I do think we may want to consider a more formal process for requests from nonprofits in the future of auction items, so we don't do this on the fly each time.
Would concur with that.
And have a more fair and open process, because that's $26,000 of value we're contributing to a single nonprofit.
Chair Bosevich, at this point, excuse me for interrupting, at this point, we would come back to you with a more thorough description of not only the equipment and the costs, but a little bit of detail about the process and perhaps some changes to this process. So at this point, this would be a decision to return to you with greater information on this topic. As well as some options on how to proceed.
At least have them pulled from the auction and set aside.
Yes.
Thank you. Sounds like there's support. Thank you.
Thank you. Then the second request that I have is just for the agenda team to consider a letter of support for the Oregon State, a letter.
Other support for that? See one? I see.
Thank you.
I see all 5 head nods on that one,
Let's see if
so.
that concludes my list of requests.
Excuse me. Any other agenda team requests this morning? Is there any other business this morning? If not, I'm going to read us into executive session. We will recess from executive session for lunch and come back out into regular session. So if we do have any decisions that come out of executive session, we'll handle those this afternoon. So the Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192-6602H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions will be made in executive session. We will be coming back out into regular session here in Harris Hall at 1:30. We are now recessed to executive session in the Board of Commissioners conference room.